And we'll begin with some politics. And Vice President Kamala Harris will be in Atlanta today for her first Georgia campaign rally as a presidential candidate. The Harris campaign says its operation in Georgia is the largest of any Democratic campaign in history. It has mobilized hundreds of staff members across 24 field offices. Georgia has also seen a real surge in volunteers, with more than 7,500 currently signed up in just 1 week. Harris's Atlanta appearances coincides with an endorsement from the state's former lieutenant governor. That's Republican Jeff Duncan, crossing party lines there. In an opinion piece in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, Duncan argued yesterday that Harris is the only viable means of defeating Donald Trump in November. So today's rally in Georgia is the Harris campaign's first step in its new plan to ramp up efforts in those key battleground states that are going to decide this election. The campaign reports more than 250 coordinated field offices across major swing states. It also has 600 staff members on the ground in the so-called blue wall states, states that have largely voted Democrat in the last several presidential elections, with an additional 150 staff planned to join next month. Harris's team said its volunteer numbers are growing as well. By the start of this week, the campaign had gained 360,000 volunteers. As for her Republican opponent, Donald Trump sat down for an interview with Fox News host Laura Ingraham last night, where he continued his attacks against Harris's intellect and once again hedged on whether or not he would debate her.
She's sort of incompetent. She's not very smart, but she's very radical. Very radical. She got rid of the laugh. I noticed I haven't seen that crazy laugh that she got. She's crazy. That laugh, that's the laugh of a crazy person. But I noticed that she's not using that laugh anymore. Somebody convinced her, don't laugh, just don't laugh. I want to do a debate, but I also can say this. Everybody knows who I am, and now people know who she is. She's a radical left lunatic. She'll destroy our country. She wants open borders.
And why not debate her?
Well, wait. But because they already know everything.
That's
you know,
right.
I'm leading in the polls by, I think, a lot. I don't know. I hear different numbers. But I'm leading in all of the polls. I'm leading big in all of the swing states. I don't like rewarding fake news. I don't like rewarding the people that have been up. They're going to make tens of millions of dollars with this debate.
In response to those comments, the Harris campaign released a statement accusing the GOP nominee of being scared, adding that Vice President Harris will be on the debate stage September 10th. Donald Trump can show up or not. So, Eugene Robinson, let's start here with these attacks, these new attacks that Trump is trying out on Harris about her intellect, about her laugh. Seems to be the mark of a campaign that doesn't really know yet how to go after its new opponent.
They don't have a clue at this point how to go after Kamala Harris. They were all set up. They had their plan A to go after Joe Biden's age and fragility. And now, obviously, they can't do that. And so what do? Do they go straight to she's a woman? Do they go straight to she's a black and South Asian woman? Do they, this idea of trying to attack her intelligence, it makes absolutely no sense given who she is and what she has achieved in her life. So they just don't know what to do. I mean, they're spinning their wheels at this point, and we'll see. I assume at some point they'll come out with a more or less coordinated attack strategy, but they're nowhere near that now.
So at least it would seem, as Eugene said, I mean, some of these attacks are borderline sexist and or flat out sexist. And Trump himself has not used DEI, that phrasing, as much as a lot of his fellow Republicans have, but it's all part of the same attack line. It seems to me that, there is still that sliver of people in this country who don't know who yet they're voting for. Some of those people are women or men who will be offended by these kind of comments. This seems really risky here.
Kamala Harris is not defined yet by the majority of American voters, except for Donald Trump's base. They know they have their impression of Kamala Harris. That's obviously not going to change. Other than that, he needs to get to work. His campaign needs to get to work. This has been over a week and a half, and they haven't really landed an attack on her that's resonating. They are just so all over the place. You hear, oh, she's not that bright. She failed at the border, but it's not coordinated. There's not any drumbeat going. And so as of now, I would not give them a very high score on being able to define her. And also, Trump seems very scared and weak about the debate. Jason Miller came on with Chris Jansen on this network and said that Donald Trump definitely would debate, and that was not what Trump was saying last night to Laura Ingraham. He seemed to be hedging in a big way.
And there's certainly worry about some of these attacks. On Fox Business yesterday, host Stuart Varney criticized Trump for calling Vice President Harris dumb.
I've been hearing a lot from women. They are not happy with what Trump has been saying and some of the language that he's using about Kamala Harris. It's insulting. I've been out and about over the weekend, and when Donald Trump called Kamala Harris dumb, that was a profound mistake, in my opinion. Women react to that kind of thing, and so they should. I mean, don't you think he should tone down the language? And okay, get through to the central message, by all means, but tone the language down. He said he was going to be nice, and then he says, oh, I'm not going to be nice. I think that's a mistake.
So, John Hallman, your latest column for Puck is titled The Harris Honeymoon and Team K's Quest to Make It Last. Certainly, at this moment, 9 days in, it has. And we're seeing Republicans flail a bit in terms of how to respond. Where does this go next?
I'd say they're flailing more than a bit. The flailing has been kind of comprehensive over the course of this period. I will say that we got a preview, I think, of what some of this is going to look like when Dave McCormick put up that ad last week that was very focused almost exclusively on her being excessively liberal. And I think if you talk to people around Kamala Harris, that they recognize that she put out a lot of baggage, issues baggage, which is all comes from that period of time from when she was running in the Democratic primary in 2020. And the party was running, except for Joe Biden. It turned out that Joe Biden made the right bet. Joe Biden was who he was, which was a moderate kind of a center-left Democrat. The rest of the party lurched very far to the left on a lot of questions. And that McCormick ad kind of laid out all of the stuff that kind of paints her as being too extreme for the center. The Trump campaign has finally got its first ads on the air. The campaign, not the super PAC. Those ads are basically a boiled down version of this McCormick ad, which was, I think, about 2 minutes long, but they have a real ad now that's out that Trump put up on Truth Social yesterday. And I think the focus of their efforts is going to be to try to paint her. And Trump has been hitting this in his speeches too, although Trump is all over the place, but he keeps coming back to that she's extreme, that she's liberal. She uses San Francisco, kind of points to all those things. How well that will stick is anyone's guess. But there's no question that focus, if you are trying to define someone, focus is important. It's almost more important than what you focus on, is that you focus in some way. And certainly this is not a vulnerability that the Harris people are unaware of. And so the question for them is going to be how fast they can get up on defense. And that is a whole other discussion we can have. They have a lot to do in a very short period of time.
Yeah, they do, and they're certainly raising a ton of money. At this point, they have such media coverage. They haven't spent much of it yet, but that's going to change quickly. So